Do you want to know how you know you got a garbage police department? It's when the same federal government who screwed up Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam is concerned about your public image. In fact, it's gotten to the point where currently the Department of Justice could very well take over the Portland Police Bureau because the Portland Police Department has been under a federal consent decree for the better part of a decade.
Seems like a long time, doesn't it? It is.
Which means that even when citizens tried to get change through courts, the Portland Police Department essentially gave the citizens the Stephen A. Smith response.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you,
We don't care.
And once you learn about this police department, nobody in their right mind could possibly blame Uncle Sam for wanting to try to keep them in line. You've got everything from domestic violence, DUIs, to pedophilia in this department. Never mind the police brutality. So sit back and grab your favorite drink and let's take a deep dive into the Portland Police Department murder pigs. Many people will see this video as the defense of Antifa video, and to be honest with you, it kind of is, because even someone like me who does research into bad cops had no idea about just why groups like Antifa and other anarchist groups have been going at the cops.
Freaking pigs!
The first thing that you gotta know about these street level conflicts between Antifa and the police in Portland is that it was the police who started the fight.
My attitude is, don't start nothing, won't be nothing.
And you'll begin to see this as the video progresses. But first, we gotta learn more about the police in Portland. This agency was formed in 1870. It has around 900 officers, 50 cadets, and 300 civilian positions, with an annual budget of $241.5 million as of 2019. Also, the Portland Police Association, which is the police union in Portland, was established in 1942, which makes it the longest continuously operating police union in the US. Let's go back to Antifa. Back in the early 1900s, around the 1910s, PPB established a quote red squad end quote to fight the rise of communism and general left-wing movements, who then teamed up with the KKK in Oregon and the Silver Shirts in the 1930s, who was an underground American fascist organization, and they were also known as the Silver Legion of America. And there are some people
Bootlickers
who defend police officers and also fascists who will say, oh, well, how do you know they were fascists?
Playing dumb, huh?
Well, we know they were fascists because they were modeled after Benito Mussolini's black shirts.
Where do you think these images are from? You could be forgiven for thinking they're from Nazi Germany at the height of the Third Reich. But they're not. This is America.
I pledge undivided allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
They wanted a, quote, Christian commonwealth, end quote, in America that was based on fascist ideology that would exclude Jewish people and non-white people in general. Their decline began shortly after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor back in 1941. Let's just say the American people were not exactly fond of fascists at that time.
Yeah, it's pretty bad timing.
And just that quickly, believe it or not, I have covered 30 years of the Portland Police Bureau working directly with fascists.
They were Nazis, dude?
So already at this point in the video, no one in their right mind could logically argue that Antifa doesn't at least have a reason to exist based on history.
But they will.
Now, some people will surely say that happened a long time ago and it is not relevant right now.
That's not how this works.
Well, the problem with saying things like that is the modern day stories of police officers who are flat out fascists and Hitler fans, who face no punishment and who was promoted throughout the department.
Actually a Nazi.
Now that sounds incredible until you review the evidence.
Charles, darling, is that a Mark Kruger over there, the famous neo-Nazi on the Portland Police? In a green shirt with his mate, with his gun?
Yeah.
But that's a US attorney over there, that's Ryan. We like him from C-SPAN. He's fine, we like him. Shall we approach him?
Yes.
Ryan, or the neo-Nazi, and the Portland Police, you know, the famous one that everyone's upset about.
In 2002 and 2003, Captain Mark Kruger was mentioned in the court filing filed by the National Lawyers Guild because he pepper sprayed non-violent anti-war protesters.
Seems unnecessary.
Including children and a journalist. The city of Portland paid out $300,000. And now you might be thinking, if money was paid out to settle the lawsuit, surely the officer was fired and not promoted.
You would think.
Well, if you thought that, you were wrong, because he wasn't fired or even disciplined, and he was in fact promoted after the lawsuit.
Wait, what?
This is a joke, right?
A whistleblower came forward and claimed that Captain Kruger was a lifelong fan of Adolf Hitler and that he would spray paint property with Nazi graffiti, collected Nazi memorabilia, dressed in Nazi uniforms, and publicly shouted racist and homophobic slurs.
Nazi ain't got no humanity.
And now you might be thinking, well, that's one whistleblower. Well, the problem with that thought is that another second longtime friend came forward and said that Captain Kruger maintained his Nazi ideology while he was a lieutenant for the Portland Police Bureau. And this second witness provided evidence that Captain Kruger illegally built a monument to memorialize 5 Nazi soldiers, and that includes one SS officer who was suspected of war crimes.
Isn't that fascism?
Now you might be thinking, okay, so this guy was clearly in the wrong, and yes, there's a clear history of fascism from this department's history, but that does not prove bias in favor of far-right groups, fascist groups, and/or white supremacist groups.
Bootlickers.
And if you thought that, then I got some news for you, because the only reason why the story of Captain Kruger became relevant is because from 2016 through 2019, there was a series of very interesting events in response to far-right militias and white supremacist groups.
Those Nazis.
There were a series of protests from 2016 through 2018 initiated by far-right militias and white supremacist groups. And we're talking literal skinheads and fascists here. According to a draft report from an independent police review investigation that probed Portland Police's response to those white supremacist and/or fascist rallies. And that investigation found that there were some very, very friendly conversations between Portland Police and members of those groups. Like, for example, the Willamette Week, a local news publication in Portland, showed friendly text message conversations between a Portland police lieutenant and members of far-right groups that would go on to engage in violence at those rallies.
It seems to me a strange thing.
Yeah, nothing to see here, folks. Because remember, when people testified against then Lieutenant Mark Kruger, saying that he was a Nazi and that he believed in Nazi ideology,
A pattern, sir? A villainous pattern indeed.
the Portland police not only did not listen, they promoted this man, and now he currently works in forensics. But moving on. And now you might be saying, well, maybe the police were just being friendly because they wanted to arrest these people. Well, if you thought that, you would be wrong, because those text messages included information about how one member with an active arrest warrant could avoid being arrested by police, such as the very police officer that was engaging in this text message exchange. And that lieutenant also revealed details about the movement patterns of the opposing groups such as Antifa, which further demonstrates why Antifa has been so upset with Portland police. And of course, PPB denied any wrongdoing and claimed that those texts were sent with the intention to gain cooperation with those far-right groups. You know, the skinheads and the Nazis.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait, first of all, you're not gonna speed past that like you didn't just say what you just said.
In one, Lieutenant Naya tells Gibson to make sure his friend doesn't do anything to draw their attention if he still has a warrant in the system. In another, the lieutenant tells Gibson, now is a great time to break down the rally and be able to leave. We have a large group of Antifa trying to flank us and you. We're stopping them for now, but not sure how long.
Wait, but wouldn't that mean that the Portland police were using the far-right groups as shock troops, essentially? I mean, that would kind of be working with terrorists. Is anyone gonna say anything about this? Is anyone gonna make any noise about this? Am I the only one who sees this mess? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Those are the kind of people you want to cooperate with, and also to gain intelligence. And now you might be saying, well, that sounds reasonable. The problem with that is the FBI brought no charges, even though members of those far-right militias, once again the fascists, the skinheads, and the racists, had traveled across state lines in order to engage in the rallies that I've already mentioned were violent. Now, one would think that would usually fall under the definition of terrorism.
Oh, you think so?
You know, when you use political violence for a stated goal. And it's not like fascist skinheads and racists haven't been stating their goals for well over 100 years now. You might be thinking, well, if all this is true, why didn't the Portland City Council, you know, the people who are supposed to be keeping an eye on the cops, intervene and do some kind of investigation?
I got news for you.
In May of 2019, the Portland City Council hired a private police auditing company, and that sounded great because that would mean the city of Portland is hiring professionals to conduct an independent investigation into PPB's response to the far-right protests.
Where was your antennas?
Now, if you were thinking that the information contained within the files of that investigation would be made public,
Antennas.
well, I got some news for you, because to date, there has not been a public hearing or progress reports from that company. And what makes that very interesting is that would mean that it's been 2 years now, and the Portland City Council took taxpayer dollars, hired a private police auditing company to conduct an outside investigation, and some have said that was just to save face. Because if that were not the case, then why in the world have we not seen the results of that independent investigation? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, surely many of these issues have got to be coming from some of the past police chiefs and even potentially from the current Portland police chief. And my response to that is, you have no idea how right you are, because nothing shows you how corrupt a police department truly is than the history of their police chiefs. Now, when you look at Portland, you find some very, very interesting stories. In fact, we'll go back 11 years and we will explore the past 8 police chiefs of the Portland Police Bureau, or PPB. There is Rosie Sizer, who was police chief from June 2006 to May 2010. Well, she was fired after she held a press conference organized by the police department to criticize the then mayor's funding decisions. But of course, that is not the only reason why she was let go. She was also let go because some years ago, the city of Portland agreed to pay a $1.6 million settlement due to the death of a mentally ill man in police custody. The then Portland mayor, Sam Adams, said that the firing of Rosie Sizer was not just on the fly, but that there were cumulative issues with Sizer. And Sizer had the nerve to say that she, quote, has accomplished some remarkable reforms, end quote, while acting as the Portland police chief. And I guess remarkable reforms includes allowing a mentally ill man to die in police custody. And then you had Michael Reese, who was chief from May 2010 to January 2015. He was fired because Portland police were known to be brutal to homeless people, because that's what Jesus would do. And officers within the Portland police were known to be particularly brutal to homeless people under that man's direction. Then you had Larry O'Day, who was chief from January 2015 to March 2016. And mind you, Larry O'Day was supposed to replace Michael Reese, who was a scumbag. And it turns out that Larry O'Day went with a friend on a hunting trip, got drunk, and then shot that man, and then lied about it, which means that Larry O'Day is the modern day Dick Cheney. And then the person who was the interim police chief after him was Donna Henderson, who was originally hired by the department in 1988, which means that she was within the department when Larry O'Day shot his friend, and she knew about it because she was facing a city inquiry, and she was summarily dismissed from her job as acting police chief of Portland on June 27th of 2016. But then she was rehired later on as the interim coordinator for Portland's liquor licensing program in the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, because people who cover up shootings are the kind of people you want involved in neighborhoods. After Donna Henderson had to go, a man named Mike Marshman took over as police chief. Well, he found himself in some hot doo-doo because there was some evidence that he was grabbing his stepson and shoving his stepson against the wall, thus showing you that what people have said about Portland police being bullies is not only true, but even the police chief turns out to be a bully. And so he was gone in October of 2017. The next former Portland police chief has the most ironic name ever because her name is Danielle Outlaw. Well, as you might imagine, like everyone before her, Danielle Outlaw turned out to be a scumbag as well. And she went from Portland to the Philadelphia Police Department, and she is now the acting Philadelphia Police Commissioner. And you know this person is garbage when the Philadelphia Inquirer, a publication from a different state than Oregon is talking about a 106-page report released by the National Police Foundation found that Portland police officers under Danielle Outlaw's leadership used pepper spray and flashbang grenades that, quote, unintentionally escalated tensions with the crowd, end quote, and, quote, deepened community mistrust in the police, end quote. So this woman was garbage in Oregon. Then she goes to Philadelphia, where there are reports that the police there are just as violent as the ones in Portland. It's almost as if moving the devil around doesn't make them lose their horns. So then the very next person was Jamie Raish, who resigned as Portland police chief because apparently she wanted to police black people, Hispanic people, Asians, and just general non-white people, but she didn't want to hire them because her entire staff were white. And so black leaders from Portland sent her a letter about her all-white staff, and a day after receiving that letter, she resigned. So it's almost as if someone discovering a problem, pointing it out, and attempting to start a conversation made her hit the eject button on her entire career as Portland police chief. And now you have this clown, Chuck Lovell, who was hired back in June of 2020 and is currently the Portland police chief. And now you might be saying, why would you call him a clown? Well, I'm calling him a clown because under his watch, the federal government could take over the Portland Police Department. And this clown had the nerve and the audacity to say, quote, you can want police reform without decimating your police bureau, end quote. And my response to this clown is gonna be, hey Chuck, when your department can learn to obey the law that a federal judge handed down to you, then and only then do you get to lecture people about the fate of your police department. Because at this point, you may not be chief soon. And let's not mince words here or try to underplay the significance of this federal consent decree that the Oregon Police Department has been under for quite some time now. There are a little bit over 19,000 American cities, and less than 30 are under such a federal consent decree due to their police departments, which would mean that the Portland Police Department isn't just bad, they are demonstrably bad. And if you try to argue against that, then I'm going to ask you, do you understand how math works? But what do I know? I'm just a devil in the details.